invite James Harris back up. Thank you very much, Imam David Shukran, to come to present the Jean Augustine Dreamkeeper's Life Achievement Award, and Daniel Stringer to come to assist in this. The awardee, Mr. Lloyd States. Margaret States will receive on behalf of her father. Welcome.
Before I start, I want to acknowledge the military personnel. If you could just stand up and just give them a round of applause. We have special guests from Lieutenant Colonel Nico Olshaft, the Defense Attaché for the German Embassy, Captain Clive Cyril, forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, from the D&D, Mr. Dwayne Henry, CD from the D&D, Lieutenant Colonel Jordan Schraub, from the, I guess D&D as well, right? Okay. MWO Brett Perry, sorry, and then Sergeant Retired Joan Buchanan. Yeah. Thank you. Give them a round of applause. Thank you for coming. We appreciate the knowledge that you're here. Just before I get started, I want to tell a quick story to sort of lead into this award given to Ms. Margaret on behalf of her father. Imam Dalik spoke about your worst enemies may become your best friends. So as I was listening to him speak, I was reminded of a quick story that I'll share with you. About 15 years ago, I was leaving a meeting at work, and one of my colleagues, Craig, was parked next to a garbage dumpster. And in this garbage dumpster was an individual picking garbage. So me, not thinking about the person in the garbage dumpster, thinking more about my colleague, who was a bit of a prankster, I yelled out to him, "Hey Craig, why don't you give him some spare change?" Right? A personal joke. And the guy in the garbage dumpster looked at me and he said, "How about a change of attitude?" So that stuck with me to this day, and I'm reminded of it from the speech that Imam Dalik gave. Martin Luther King said that you don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. The first step starts within us. Starts within us. Sometimes we do things and we think this is personal between friends and it offends others. And it happens in every race, every community, every religion. We have to start from within if we want to achieve this dream to be materialized. With that said, because of Daniel's wisdom, I guess, I want to call it that, Daniel, he selected me to introduce the recipient of the award for today, Private Lloyd Arthur States, Sr. And I'm just going to read, I had sort of wanted to do a speech, but I'll just read what his daughter wrote. Because it is very significant, and I think that it's very important to have what they want to be said about their father, who has now passed. Lord Arthur States, a sixth-generation Nova Scotian in African descent, was born in New Glasgow on April 23, 1923, to parents Carl and Sarah Brody States. He had two older siblings, Roy and Ethel. Lord attended the Temperance Street School until he completed grade 6. Immediately after leaving school, he worked for a cement company mixing mortar, and by the age of 16, he was working as a driver for a community trucking company. Lord financially supported the family from the age of 14, as his father had been blinded in an industrial accident and could no longer work. After receiving the notice from the Department of National Defense on his 20th birthday in 1943, Lloyd enlisted in the Army the following day. After completing infantry combat training at Camp Aldershot in Nova Scotia, Lloyd shipped out to England with the Canadian Infantry Replacement Unit in December 1943. It was in England that the training for the Special Service Force began. By early February 1944, he was in Italy, where he was recruited into the Special Service Force, an American and Canadian unit consisting of soldiers who had been specifically trained to take out the enemy without using a gun. Their initial mission was to drive the Germans out of Italy. Private States, a muscular physique and height of over 6 feet tall, plus his military documentation made him an acceptable candidate for the Special Force. And the officers accepted him. The officer accepted him. But soldiers from the American southern states, remember this is 1943, right? The soldiers from the American southern states thought otherwise. Even though the officers accepted him, the soldiers did not. They complained about his black presence in their elite operation and started a petition to have him removed from the unit. Private States was unmovable. He had been dealing with racism from the time he started going to school, sitting in the back of classrooms and being ignored by teachers. The movie theaters, the restaurants, lunch counters were closed to him in New Glasgow. The only employment available to him was manual labor. He could buy clothes only at a particular store and then could never try them on there. It was his mother's problem if the size did not fit. After having endured grueling training in England that included learning to be a parachutist to qualify for the Special Service Unit, Private States was determined not to leave right away. Initially, he had to endure racial slurs daily, but when the unit was at Anzio, he was no longer readily noticed, not because everyone had to blacken their face and hands, but because he proved himself by returning from missions that he was sent on. Okay? So everybody at that time, they had to blacken their hands. Boot polish is part of the camouflage when they went on missions. So even though he was black, and then people would, they still had to put black boot polish on their faces, and they still did not accept him. Only the officers did. Private States left the Special Service Force and they entered Rome. By the time the petition for his removal had been approved, Private States returned to the original unit of the Royal Canadian Regiment and went with these soldiers to France and fought the Germans along the France-German border. Finally, Private States arrived in Amsterdam with the RCR in 1945. There, he often engaged in hand-to-hand combat as his regiment was ridding the country of the Germans. He was in Amsterdam on May 5th, 1945, when the Netherlands was liberated. Then in June 1945, Private States landed in England, where he waited at the Canadian military camp in Aldershot for transportation back to Canada. On July 4th, 1945, about 500 Canadian soldiers were involved in a riotous behavior on the streets of Aldershot. They were protesting against being detained in England and wanted to go home. Unfortunately, they caused extensive damage in the shopping district of the town, which incensed the local citizens. Immediately, Private States was accused and subsequently faced court-martial for mutiny and inciting mutiny, which had a death penalty. While the trial was being conducted, the majority of the Canadian soldiers were repatriated to Canada. The charge of mutiny was dropped, and Private States was sentenced to serve 10 years in prison. But that was changed to 5 years. After spending 4 months in several prisons throughout England, Private States then spent time in 3 military detention depots in Canada. He was released from detention on September 26, 1946, and given an honorary discharge from the Army. He returned to New Glasgow on Saturday, September 28th. 2 months later, Lord Cora Gerald, whom he married on April 14th, 1947. Together, they raised 7 children. His wife died on March 9, 1973. Lloyd died in his sleep on April 6, 1996, with a big smile on his face, the way he wanted to die. Private Lloyd States Sr. was awarded the following medals: 1939-45, the Star Participation in War, the War Medal, 1939 to 1945, awarded by King George VI for defending the Commonwealth, the Italy Star for participation in the Italian campaign, the France-German Star, participating in the France-German, Northwest, Europe, Netherlands campaigns, Canadian Voluntary Service Medal for service overseas, Spearhead for Excellence, presented by United States of America for Excellence in Special Operations, Combat Infantry Badge, awarded for excellence in combat infantry, presented by the United States of America, Congressional Gold Medal, awarded to the 1st Special Service Force, FSSF, for its pivotal role in the outcome of WW2 World War II. His daughter is here today, and she will receive the annual award on behalf of her father, Arthur. And Daniel will be the one presenting this award. Margaret States is here on behalf of her father, Lord States, and Daniel will be the one to. This is the Jane Augustine Dreamkeeper's Life Achievement Award, presented by Daniel Stringer.
Is Denise in the audience? Denise Fiale? No? I'm wearing my glasses this year, Denise. The Jean Augustine Dreamkeeper Life Achievement Award presented to pioneer and patriot Lloyd Arthur States Sr., pioneer of racial integration in the Armed Forces of North America, recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal for service in the Elite Commando 1st Special Service Force, the Black Devils, for its pivotal role in the victory of World War II. A proud nation salutes you, Ottawa, January 15, 2018.
Good afternoon, everyone who is enjoying freedom. Wow. On behalf of my siblings, Philip, Sarah, Crystal, Charles, Howard, and our niece, Faith, the daughter of our deceased brother, Lloyd Jr., I thank all of you for recognizing our dad for the role he played in securing freedom for so many during World War II. However, if he were here today, he probably would try to refuse it because he saw himself as just a soldier doing what had to be done. Before I go any further, I want to apologize on behalf of my siblings who could not be here today. But you know, we're all getting older, and health and distance and flight delays kept them from being here. During the past week, I spoke to my siblings about our dad, focusing on something unique that they remembered, something they could share with you today. Howard, the youngest in the family, remembers Dad saying to him, "Son, never go to war. War is evil. It kills innocent women and children." Charles remembers him as a very obliging person. Dad was willing to help anyone with anything at any time. How he was non-judgmental to the point that he would not tolerate his friends behaving like that is what Crystal remembers. He would say, "Don't talk about people. You don't know their story." Sarah remembers his generosity. He would literally give you the shirt off his back if you hinted that you needed it. He was generous with his money, sometimes too generous. If a friend needed financial assistance, Dad helped him. That often meant we had less in our house. Our dad could find humor in the most serious situations. Philip remembers how he would make us laugh at ourselves, even when we didn't feel like laughing. Our dad could tell anecdotes and jokes for hours without repetition. I personally remember his emphasis on respect. We had to respect each other. Derogatory name calling was not permitted. I can still hear Dad's words. Treat others the way you want them to treat you, and never let anyone use you for their gain. My siblings and I all agreed that our dad could not cook. However, he often boasted that he was a better cook than our mother. Yes, we ate whatever he prepared, which only reinforced his belief that he could cook. But we ate it because the alternative was hunger. There was no McDonald's in New Glasgow when we were kids. Unfortunately, life with our dad was not always laughter and wisdom. During my younger siblings' formative years, he was constantly in turmoil. Actually, he was suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is most likely that the constant media attention to the Vietnam War was a main trigger for his episodes. We weren't able to make that connection as kids, and we certainly didn't know about PTSD. He continually relived the war, and we relived it with him. There were so many frightening episodes, which generally happened at night. And perhaps you didn't hear about the reason why the soldiers blackened their face and so on. I'm sure the military people would know. But when they were on Anzio, they did night combat. And so, you have to be, so no light is reflected, you have to be blackened. Okay? So anything that happened in our household generally happened at night. The horrible things happened at night. He was in combat mode, and we were the enemy. Our mother, the stabilizing force in our home, or as my brother Philip described her, the glue that held us together, managed to always keep us safe. The most frightening experience for me happened one summer afternoon when I was 16. Dad entered the living room. His eyes glazed over. He did not speak. He grabbed our mother. Sorry. He grabbed our mother, wrestled her to the floor, and put one hand around her neck. I somehow got between them enough, forcing him to grab my right arm. The pressure from his thumb, which would have killed her, left a mark on my arm. It's still there. I think it was my screaming that stopped him. The war certainly impacted our dad, but there was another factor that left a negative influence on him. When the war was over in Europe in May 1945, he was supposed to return home in June, but ended up in the Canadian barracks in Aldershot, England. In July, he was charged with mutiny after 2 nights of rioting by Canadian soldiers. That charge carried the death penalty. He was in custody while the other soldiers departed to Canada. The mutiny charge was dropped, but there were other charges. Initially, he was sentenced to 10 years. That was reduced to 5 years. After he had physically fought for freedom for others, he lost his. 15 months later, after spending time in military prisons in England and Canada, he returned to New Glasgow. He was not physically injured during the war, but psychologically, he was scarred deeply. His sense of spirituality was shattered. He had left God on a battlefield. Years later, he told me, "I don't believe in God, because if there was a God, the things that happened to me would not have happened." He had lost more than a year of his life in prison because the military needed a scapegoat. To cope with life, he had started drinking liquor every day. Prior to going to the war, he had a goal of one day owning a trucking business, but it never materialized. He wasn't able to make civic plans after the war. Meeting our mother was an incentive for him to get a job at the cement company. After working for a few months, he married her. However, for several years, he had difficulty keeping a job. But working for a landscaping company proved to be the right one for him. He worked there until retirement. When our mother died of cancer in 1973, Dad was devastated. I was living in another country at the time, but my younger siblings were at home. They had to find new ways to survive his increased outbursts as well as his grief. Eventually, everyone grew up and Dad left home. He relocated to Dartmouth, where he lived a quiet life with an elderly aunt. It was there that he found peace. The nightmares and the flashbacks stopped. He had a heart condition for years, but never complained or talked about it. In 1994, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, which became a great concern for all of us. But on April 6, 1996, a heart attack ended his life. Almost 10 years after his death, the family became aware of what he actually endured during the war. In 2005, the 1st Special Service Force contacted our sister Crystal regarding the awarding of the Combat Infantry Badge. Our brother Howard attended the reunion in Calgary to receive that medal. While there, he met and talked to men who actually knew our dad when he was at Anzio in Italy. With the information Howard shared with us, we began to have an understanding of what Dad faced during the war. In our own time, each of us has released the anger we held towards him. It was when the Congressional Gold Medal was awarded in 2015 that the secrecy ended concerning the activities of the 1st Special Service Force. That was when we all knew the truth about what our dad had done in the war. Today is extra special because your presence here says to me that you acknowledge that a man like my dad, a war veteran, paid a high price to win a war that ensured freedom for many, not only at that time, but also now, because we continue to live in freedom. We can have dreams. Thank you.
God bless you.